Welcome, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jen Handy, and I am SHEP's Executive Director. For those of you who are new to SHEP or came through to this event kind of through an invite from a partner, and you're like, what is this? Here at SHEP, we encourage the study of poverty and inequality as complex social issues by expanding and improving educational opportunities for college students in a wide range of disciplines and career trajectories. Fancy words, but we are here to promote poverty studies just in general and at our schools. And we work hard with those amazing partners to kind of support the work happening at the universities. We partner with amazing community partners to get students out in the community to kind of contextualize that work. And tonight, I get to work with several of our partners for tonight's event. One of those I really want to highlight is Campus Kitchen at Washington and Lee University. They are co-hosting this event, and it's part of their Just Food Speaker Series. And if there is a link to other events in that, Ryan will put that in the chat if you are curious about learning more. Tonight's event is part of a SHEP Springboard event. So what is that? It means you'll have the chance to hear from some speakers and kind of their ideas and their concepts. And then we have provided online possible discussion questions so that you could springboard, yes, into a conversation from the virtual conversation here into a local conversation in your classroom, in your community, with friends, and just kind of keep that going. Those questions are meant to be for the entire event series, and we will have a few more podcasts coming out that kind of touch on the same issues. So you can find all of that online. In a moment, I'll introduce our guests, but I wanted to let you know that tonight you can submit your questions in the chat, and one of the hosts will kind of look over those. We'll try and leave time for that at the end of our time. All right, now to the main event. All right. I'm excited to welcome our two panelists, Maureen McNamara Best, Executive Director of the Local Environmental Agriculture Project, or LEAP, and Zach Zook, Chief Strategy Officer for the Central Pennsylvania Food Bank, for tonight's conversation. Maureen has been working with food, agriculture, and community since the early 2000s and is currently the Executive Director of LEAP in Roanoke, Virginia. Her work and professional experience is wide-ranging and has taken her from teaching high school agriculture in Raleigh, North Carolina, near me, to studying the economic viability of the local food system in northern Colorado, among many other things. I encourage you to look at your full bios online. Very impressive panelist. In addition to her degrees, Maureen is a current Bloomberg Fellow at Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health, where she studies the intersection of food systems, community, and health. All right. As Chief Strategy Officer, Zach Zook leads the Impact, Policy Research, and Government Relations team at the Central Pennsylvania Food Bank, where he has worked since 2021. He's responsible for leading strategic planning of priorities and initiatives, along with implementation across the organization. In doing so, he and his team connect with partners at all levels of community, from local to federal. Zach studied and worked all over the world, from Syria and Lebanon to Virginia, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, concentrating on anti-poverty, food insecurity, and public policy. And finally, Ryan McCoy, Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies at Washington and Lee University, will serve as our event moderator. Professor McCoy is a philosopher whose research focuses on social and ethical problems in climate change research and policy, as well as community-based approaches to address these issues. Prior to working at Washington and Lee, he was a fellow at the USDA Midwest Climate Hub and has experience conducting assessments and fieldwork with farmers and other ag professionals across the Midwest. Thank you for being here, and I'll let you take it on over.
Thanks, Jen. As Jen said, I'm Ryan McCoy. I am a professor here at Washington and Lee University. So at the beginning here, I just wanted to talk about kind of the central theme for tonight's discussion. And so the question really is how do different food systems, organizations balance addressing these immediate needs with larger systemic issues? And so some of the goals for our conversation tonight is just going to be to highlight some of the programs and outreach efforts that Zach and Maureen are involved in, showcase the opportunity for these different organizations and individuals to impact different issues, right, based on their experience and skills, and then also sort of dig into the emerging challenges that these organizations are facing, as well as general food systems issues. So maybe to start off, if we want to do just some very brief introductions so that you guys can talk maybe a little bit more about the organizations that you all work with. So we can maybe begin with Maureen and then Zach follow up.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I am honored to be able to talk about the work that LEAP is doing. We are based in Roanoke, Virginia, so similar to Lexington, mountains, uh, geographically close to a couple of different food production regions, and also small, mid-sized city, and a lot of urban and rural communities in our area. We are largely food and farming based nonprofit. We work in Roanoke and then also do a lot of advocacy and network building and partnership development regionally and statewide. A lot of the ways that we've approached things is through partnership and through how do we really listen to community to figure out what's going on and constantly shift. When we take an explicit systems approach to the food. And so that means looking at food production and food access and food distribution and all of the things that that shift all of the different aspects of food production, distribution, and access. So we have farmers markets, community gardens, a mobile farmers market, a farm share, a food hub, a processing kitchen, a retail store, and an aggregated farm share. So we started with farmers markets and have really grown out. And then we have a number of what we call incentive programs, our harvest bucks, including a prescription program to really look at the how do you pay farmers a fair price for food and not make it too expensive or inaccessible to consumers. So really trying to look at the intersection between production, distribution, and consumption.
Right. And I'm, of course, Zach Zook with the Central PA Food Bank. So we are one of 200 Feeding America food banks across the United States. We're the largest food bank in Pennsylvania, covering 27 counties. From Lancaster County, basically the Maryland border, all the way up to the New York border. So we have an extremely large service territory that's very diverse, urban areas, rural areas, a lot of agriculture across our entire service territory as well, which is an important part of our work. We serve about 270,000 neighbors every single month through various different programs. And when I mean we have a network of 1,100 partner organizations across our 27 counties. These are awesome community-based resources, food pantries, youth programs, senior programs, and then we also run our own programs that are mobile pantries to help support communities where there maybe don't exist as many food pantries or resource hubs as well. But the biggest part of our work is, of course, getting food out to our partner organizations and to neighbors. So we have three distribution hubs, one in Harrisburg, PA, our biggest hub, then also in Williamsport and out in Hollidaysburg near Blair County. So really covering all three areas of our service territory. And so sourcing operations, transportation, that's the biggest piece of our work. But also we are really focused on connecting people to SNAP. For instance, SNAP is the largest federal nutrition program and is just absolutely critical to helping people access the food that they need on a regular basis. So we have a SNAP outreach team and helpline as well. And then we have a really robust research team at the food bank, really focused on how can we learn from our neighbors facing food insecurity, how can we learn from our partners, and of many different sorts to serve people in the best way possible. And that, of course, converts itself into our government relations work, where we try to use research and data and our experience distributing food to neighbors and facing food insecurity to inform policymakers.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So this first question is jumping off a little bit sort of what you said we're talking about towards the end there, Zach, which is really just how do you tailor food insecurity alleviation efforts to, your specific social, economic, and geographic characteristics of the communities that you all serve?
Yeah, absolutely. So even though all of our counties are in Central PA, they're very different from one another. And so what we've done is we've employed a research method where we essentially conduct localized food insecurity and charitable food system response research studies over the course of a year for each of our counties that we serve. We've conducted this research since 2022, and we've completed our research called Community Hunger Mapping in 15 of our 27 counties so far. So we're more than halfway done with that research. Really, what that does is that we partner with local food distributors or food pantries across each county, as well as local government and a variety of different stakeholders to really employ different research methods. We conduct neighbor surveys at pantries across each county, so geographically, demographically representative pantries. We've held focus groups, do interviews with neighbors to learn about their experiences accessing food. And we've also developed a variety of different analytical methods that kind of help us scale to our entire service territory, where we should focus on things like SNAP outreach or WIC outreach, or really just where we might need to distribute more food. And so that research is really intensive over the course of a year for each county, but we also do that work through local food policy councils in most cases. And that's also how we sustain that work, is that when we conduct research, it's really not intended to drop a report and leave. We're dropping a report and we're doing the implementation work alongside all of the partners and neighbors in that particular county.
So are you all doing that research in-house or partnering with other folks to do that?
Yeah, so we do it almost entirely in-house. When we got started, we partnered with a social work professor at Millersville University. They helped us get set up, especially the qualitative side of our research. And from there, we've been able to hire just some really great folks who have experience conducting community research. And we find that really the piece is that follow-up. The key piece to like being effective is making sure that we continue to measure impact and to measure how conditions change. And so to do that, we felt the best way was to really do it in-house and build those capabilities.
So I think that can be really hard with data and research is that it often is at a scale that's hard to figure out what it means at the community level. And so for a lot of, we participate in GusNIP grants through NIFA, which are very research intensive. And so we have built up our research capacity internally, working with external evaluators and then us being able to do it. And so on one hand, we're really looking at program evaluation. On the other hand, we're looking at community feedback. So, we are in the community 7 days a week. And so really making sure that what we hear, we can truly hear and we can respond. And then how do we take all these lessons that we're learning at a hyper-local scale and then combine these lessons across different communities and then to really build a network so that we have state level advocacy or national level advocacy. So for us, when we talk about research, a lot of it is what are the feedback loops? What are we hearing? What's working? What's not working? And then what are the patterns that we're seeing not only within our community, but also across communities? Because oftentimes those breaks in the system are not, we feel them localized, but unless we're talking to other people, they feel like they're localized and really often it's systemic. And so a lot of the work that we've done with Virginia Fresh Match, a statewide network of SNAP matching programs that we're speaking to, Zach, we know that it is protective. So when there were big drops in the post-COVID, there was additional SNAP funding that came out during COVID when people lost that funding, they didn't reduce, at least for Virginia Fresh Match, they didn't reduce the amount of fruits and vegetables they had because they were also part of these bigger systems. They were part of they were prioritizing their SNAP usage at the community level to be able to stretch their dollars. So that's a big global conversation. And what does it look like at the community level is how do you create welcoming spaces where people feel comfortable regardless of how they're paying for food to be able to access fresh fruits and vegetables. So, it is challenging to really work at the hyper local level, the individual farmer level, the individual consumer level, and then to pull all this information to create to look at the patterns and say, well, what are some interventions? And I think in systems and complex systems, especially food, which is an incredibly complex system, a lot of times there are these silver bullet solutions that are proposed. Well, if you do this one thing, everything's going to be solved, and that's not really how it works. So how do we approach the questions with that complexity in mind, and also look for those patterns? And so what do we centralize and what do we not centralize when we're building a network, or when we are one community is one community, one farmers market is one farmers market, and if none of the farmers markets can accept SNAP, then none of the farmers markets can accept SNAP. So it's like there's some things that are barriers that we can come together to advocate for, and there are some things that don't make sense to be standardized across all of the communities. And so at a more hyper local example, the mobile market, we serve a lot of low income senior housing sites where people have limited access to transportation and there isn't some place that they can walk to easily. We also serve a lot of immigrants and refugee, apartment complexes where immigrants and refugees live. And the food that we bring on the mobile market is drastically different in each one of those communities. So then we have to source for more farmers to be able to have the variety of produce and the variety of meat and the variety of dairy that meets those specific cultural preferences. And cultural preferences also includes like dental care. If you don't have the ability to bite into an apple, then you can't, you have to figure out how to have food that is accessible to that specific community. Or if you don't have the manual dexterity to peel a butternut squash, that's why we started processing butternut squash and having it be able to sell it frozen. So it's like, what does that specificity look like? And then also, what are those models that you can pull that data together for a meaningful, at a scale of conversation that a lot of policy wants to look at?
hmm Yeah. Yeah. Even though like we've done this research across 15 counties and very, very different counties, it's still difficult to translate that and to convince policymakers that that is the case at a statewide level or even beyond that. But we've definitely seen like similarities across communities. I think the other challenge is like at the super, super local level. So let's say like one food pantry, for instance. We found that when it was that pantry conducting surveys themselves, there's this power dynamic between people who are providing food and people who are receiving food. And often people feel uncomfortable to even like say anything negative about or to give any constructive feedback on like the services because uh, oftentimes people think or have been conditioned to think that you're getting help for free. That also means that you aren't able to provide feedback or like provide negative feedback. So that's also one thing that we try to demonstrate is at individual pantry levels, how can we communicate that we heard, help people communicate that we heard their feedback? It's very welcome, and we want to continue to get better at what we do to serve folks.
Yeah, thank you guys for those incredible and detailed answers, right? And really navigating kind of all those complexities that go into it. The next question that I wanted to ask was just how you guys see food as acting as a kind of cultural force in the different communities that you work with.
I'm happy to take that. I think that food is so central to how we navigate our day-to-day life. And we have also become very separate from where the food comes from and the taste of food. And so, how do we support the people who are looking for the food that brings them joy? Um, and I think with the mobile market in particular, we see that because with the seniors, it is produce is something that they have memories of from childhood in a different way than maybe some kids have in their current childhood. And similarly, there are a number of immigrant and refugee communities that are coming from agriculture backgrounds, and more market-based, open market-based um, uh, food communities, and the way that they interact with food is very different. And so, how can we meet the cultural expectations um, uh, of communities? And then, how can we also broaden and introduce um, everyone who wants to explore food in a way that feels safe and comfortable? And so at our Tuesday weekday market, one thing that our market manager really tried out and has had a ton of success is we have kids bucks. So any kid that comes to the market, they get $5 in $1 cards that then the kids choose what to shop. So they have the conversations with the farmers. And it also takes the pressure off the parents. So if a kid wants to try a tomato and has never had a tomato, then it's okay for them to explore that taste, and it's theirs to choose. And so what are the safe spaces, the comfortable, welcoming areas where people have the ability to explore food in a different way than maybe they would in a traditional grocery store setting, where you can't just kind of touch everything and taste and talk to somebody, what is this? How do I do it? So how do we really create those spaces that nurture our food community in all the different varieties and flavors and recipes that come out of that food community?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really awesome, Maureen. I think for us, we also see that obviously food is one of the most basic human needs and rights, and we found that pantries, in many ways across our service territory, they serve as a community hub at their best, and the lowest barrier place where people can access the food that they need. Like you don't have to fill out a bunch of paperwork to go visit a pantry, for instance. And sometimes pantries across our service territory, but I think more broadly as well, like institute barriers that don't necessarily need to be there. And I think for us to serve the community in the best way possible and to really serve as a center where people want to go and to be potentially connected to other resources or just find community. I think that's something that we've tried to emphasize is leaning into that status of being a low barrier social service provider.
So I wanted to transition a little bit into our next sort of segment of this conversation. We're just thinking about food procurement and in particular working with farmers at various scales, right? So one thing that I wanted to ask was just what is your approach to building relationships with farmers in your region? Um, and then maybe thinking about in what ways do you guys prioritize or not prioritize food that's grown right in an environmentally responsible sort of manner, right? If you're thinking about like utilizing small scale organic farming or something like that versus like larger scale industrial kind of ag.
We have an agricultural partnerships team that's really focused on working individually with local farmers. We have several different programs. One is an adopt a pantry program where people can grow specific food specific to a local pantry, where we try to connect the farmer to that pantry to understand like what specific foods their neighbors like and would want to have access to. We also have some work through the Pennsylvania Agricultural Surplus System that allows us to purchase products from local farmers at like regular prices, but also it helps us really salvage seconds and thirds that might otherwise go to waste. And I think that's probably our biggest focus on prioritizing environmental sustainability is really just trying to make sure that we recover as much food as we can. We have some really great partners. We don't operate a gleaning program specifically, but we have some really great partners across our service territory that we support that do. And those have been, I think, really effective ways to connect people to the work in a real tangible way, while also making sure that we don't let our local food go to waste.
The way that I think food is very relational, and the way that we approach both food access and farmers is through building strong relationships. So if we say we're going to do it, we show up and we do it on the food access side 100%, because the second we don't show up, then everything falls apart and it takes so much time to rebuild that trust. So we're very, once we commit to something, we follow through, and on the same on the farmer side. So how do we build our markets for their products at a timeline and scale that aligns with their ability to respond to that? And so that involves, years of relationship building. There are a number of farmers that, started at our farmers market in 2009. One of our farmers who started at the first year of the farmers market in 2009, was doing all farmers markets, and then wanted, as the kids were getting older, wanted to shift to wholesale. And so went from farmers market to everything she grows, she essentially sells to us and through another cooperative for the specific community, because that's a better model for her. And so we have adapted and grown in parallel and in partnership with the farmers in our region, as they've also shifted. Because if you've met one farmer, you've met one farmer. Most farmers have a lot of different outlets and markets and ways that they want to grow, and what does that look like? Or maybe they focus on something one year and it goes really well, and then they want to focus a little bit more on that. So what does, when I think about sustainability, I think about what are the properties of resilient systems. And farmers look at ecosystems and resilient systems in a different way than we tend to. I mean, they're looking at soil systems and water systems and our whole ecosystem, and they're really trained to think about, well, if I put all my eggs in this one basket and that market fails, then everything is gone. It's a perishable product. How do I move that? So in the same ways that farmers are really looking at, how do I diversify my market and spread out my risk, we are trying to complement that. Similarly, that we can purchase 5 bags of something and sell them on the mobile market, or we can work in 120 of something and move it through the farm share, or we can work in pallets and through the LFPA funding that we had, and there's some Virginia state funding for farms that we can purchase food directly from farmers and move it into, give it at no cost to pantries. So it's like we can work at multiple scales of farmers, and we can meet multiple food access needs and preferences on the other side. So I think it's really listening to what does a farmer need? What does it look like? What is a fair price? And then how do we make the logistics and the weight of the logistics be shared, including what does infrastructure look like? We have our distribution is based on most farmers in our area harvest on Monday, and most restaurants are closed on Monday. So Monday is the harvest and distribution day. So we don't have markets on Monday. We go, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So how do we kind of align with the seasonality and also the flow of work from year to year, so that we can grow in tandem? You can't just turn broccoli on overnight. You have to have that conversation over time and grow it slowly over time. And then the other thing that we've done, especially during COVID, when there was a really big uptick all of a sudden in food, we were able to work with partner food hubs from other regions, and we continue to. So, our area, it's really hard to grow organic fruit. It's just really hard. And we can work with partner food hubs from other regions, biodiverse regions, so we can bring in products that are still value aligned and still supporting farmers and other communities, to be able to meet the the consumer wants and needs.
So how do you all sort of navigate and coordinate between all these different levels of scales and partners that you all work with? Right? Because I just sort of reflecting on your responses, one thing that I noticed is like, right, and this is the thing about food systems, they are so incredibly complex, right? And the work that you all are doing involves all of these different sort of partners at different scales, right? So I'm just curious how you all kind of navigate or coordinate between all of those different things.
I wish I had a really simple answer.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's embracing the complexity is part of it, and then trying to have enough systems in place so that it all doesn't live in one person's head. Um, and that changes over time too. So what are those checkpoints? How do we keep checking in, and updating? No, I've been with Leap since 2013, and no 2 years have looked the same. And I think a lot of community facing organizations and businesses would have a similar response. If you are responding to what is emerging at the community level, um, then it is the expectation isn't that it's going to be the same every year. And I think that once we accept that, then it gets a little bit easier to move forward, because it's not the same.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that we work with a lot of urgency. So if we get a donated donation that we didn't necessarily expect, we work very quickly to connect that to partner organizations who can distribute the food to neighbors as soon as possible, because we know that produce is the most likely of all our products, right, to go bad, especially if we wait too long or if we don't package it properly, or if we put it with different types of produce that doesn't agree with. I think though, in talking with neighbors who access food pantries across our service territory, even though it's really challenging to do this work and um, get food to people when they need it and where they need it. We've talked with folks who have just really just valued the produce and the other types of healthy food offerings so much. And so I have a quote from a neighbor in Center County. It's kind of long, so I can shorten it a little bit, but they visited the food pantry the first time this week. They had a great experience and they felt welcomed with no judgment. So I'll start the quote here. The model of shopping like a normal grocery store was perfect. I have many allergies, so I need to check items to make sure I can eat or cook with them. I love that there was lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. Before I lost my job, I didn't have a lot of fresh food because it was out of budget and it didn't last. And they said that they had eaten healthier in the last week since they picked up their first month of food. And I think that we had been just recently having some struggles with keeping produce as good as possible, and really just talking with people who have had that experience from local pantries is like the why of like why do we put the effort into a really difficult product.
And I guess one question to kind of add to that on the subject of produce, right? Like you know, how do you kind of balance that goal, right, of wanting to provide fresh produce and fresh food with some of those challenges of just like storing it, transporting it, and like you said, keeping it fresh in an acceptable, form for consumption and stuff.
Well, we have a QA process before produce would go out of our warehouse, so that's how we try to prevent
Yeah.
that from happening. But of course, we can't necessarily control um, how quickly that a partner would get that out to neighbors. So we try to educate partners on different types of produce and different ways to handle it. So I think that's largely how we balance it. But of course, so produce makes up about 25% of the foods that we offer folks, but the remaining 75%, a lot of that is outside of milk and eggs is more shelf stable. And so that's also how we make sure that there are consistent staples that are more shelf stable that are available every place that people might go.
One thing that, we have starting with the mobile market, we had to make sure that we had high quality, diverse options for food all the way, to the last stop. And so, in order to really have that abundance where people feel like they are receiving the very best, which they can, should, and are, then that would mean that oftentimes at the end of the week we would have extra produce that wouldn't make it to the next week, especially in some of the some things keep really easily and some don't. And so for a number of years, we composted that, and then we piloted doing food processing, and that has really grown tremendously. And so it allows us to decrease our food waste. It allows us to buy seconds from farmers, and it allows us to also make food more accessible to more people. So some people are super comfortable with fresh produce, some are more comfortable with frozen. Um, and some are more comfortable with minimally processed. And so, if there's something that isn't going to keep, we can freeze it and then we take it out later and we turn it into fruit jerky. Or we had peaches that were going mealy, so we had great volunteers who came and just processed a bunch of peaches, and then we froze it and then we turned it into peach sauce and it became a base for a curry. And we were then able to incorporate it through into a lot of different items, and also have nutrient dense foods, especially in the winter when the selection is a little bit more limited. And so we have a really popular line of soups that are great for anyone. The seniors in particular love them. We're able to then take whatever combination of greens and starches and corn that we have and just make delicious soups. And then that also addresses the access, which can include time or skills or storage, or fresh produce is amazing. And if you only go once a month, then it's gone that month. Or if you miss a week, then you have nothing that week, especially in the mobile market. And so really trying to provide a variety of options for consumers. Also allows us to provide a variety of options for farmers, and then in the middle, we really work to make the best use of all the food available to us.
Within that, are there any particular food items that you all that there's high demand for that's really difficult to meet?
Think for us, it's meat, just the general category of meat.
Yeah.
In order, beef, then chicken, and then a very far third is fish. So when we ask people, number one, we ask if they receive the items that they enjoy often. Uh, Sometimes, never, rarely, or always is the fifth option. And so we have that question. We follow it up by what are three foods that you would like but can't always find here? And so meat comes up by far the number one at like a 4-to-1 ratio, with produce in a very far second. It's just very expensive to source in many cases. It's expensive for people to buy in grocery stores. It's expensive for food banks to provide. It's expensive just in general. So we've tried to really diversify our different sources, have some great partnerships with different producers to be able to get, like, for instance, like local meat processors through our Pennsylvania agricultural surplus system. So we have a great partnership that helps us provide more easier to access chicken for our partner organizations. But really, at the end of the day, it is often just a more expensive product to provide neighbors, especially if it's locally produced meat. And so through the Pennsylvania agricultural surplus system, our cost per pound is higher than it would be if we bought outside of Pennsylvania, for instance. And so I think that's just a challenge, but we really, of course, in everything, just do our best to provide that resource at as low a cost as we can. And we can't, we provide eggs and milk and other sources of protein very regularly, and that comes in at third and fourth of most requested products that people want.
I think really that that price point tension is challenging, both from a supply and a demand issue. So, we have a great geography. We have great ecosystem for greens, root crops, potatoes, onions, are very labor intensive and don't do awesome in our climate. And so some of it is, where can we purchase things at a price point that the market can support? There's some things that people expect to be very inexpensive, and to produce them in our climate may be challenging, or to produce them at a smaller scale may be challenging because of the labor costs. Some things are easy to grow and produce, and other ones we move a little bit further afield. So we purchase more from the Piedmont, or from further Southwest Virginia, where they have more of a commercial production orientation to, say, onions or potatoes. And 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 then really, how do you continue to pay a fair price for products, and then what does that look like? So for some of our products, like yellow squash, that some communities, they don't want an heirloom tomato, or is a variety of, they want a slicer tomato and a yellow squash, and so those aren't necessarily what is grown by smaller farmers. And so we've been able to develop a relationship with a South Side um, uh, cooperative of farmers who are growing in larger scale. It's conventional, and it's still, they're getting a fair price. We're able to pay them a higher price than they would get selling to Food Lion. So what's that space between what's a fair price and what's a consumer price, and then how far out do you go, and what does that look like, and how do you still make sure that it's value aligned? So I think those are some of the challenges, especially with a mission that we have to look at food access and farming, so that both can continue to grow. And then on the meat side, one thing that we similarly struggled with was just, it was not the price was just too high. And so we worked with Catawba Sustainability Center in Roanoke County, and we would they had grass-fed, they were doing a research project for grass-fed beef and grass-finished, and so we worked with them, and we would purchase whole cows and then get them processed just for us. And so we would do most of it in ground. We do most of it in ground, so then it's a higher quality ground, and it's a lower price point for the consumers. And so what do those creative partnerships look like, so that we're still able to work in alignment with our values, and not price everybody out of what that is. And then I think most people, it's just consistent access and regular affordable produce that they want to be able to choose, and they have high quality. And so because we sit between consumption and production, we have been able to work with farmers to grow specific varieties for specific communities that are asking for it. We had a lot of people asking for okra, and there weren't any farmers that were growing it. And we were able to talk to a farmer. They started growing okra, and now they love growing okra. They grow okra all the time. They have a big okra fest. So it's really created community around okra. And also, like, I can personally buy okra now. It's really hard to find in our community. Before, it was hard to find. So what does that short feedback look like between production and consumption? And so that's been fun to explore.
That's a really great example of community needs shaping the way that agriculture is done in the area. That's awesome. So I wanted to ask, and again, this will be kind of our sort of last question before we move into the Q&A. But something that I mentioned at the beginning, which is, how do you balance these immediate needs and then larger structural issues, right? Because on the one hand, you can have an issue, like a very immediate issue like hunger, right? And then on the other hand, right, you have larger sort of systems issues related to food insecurity. And so, how do you balance these two things? And are there moments where they potentially come into kind of tension with one another.
I can give a first shot. So I think, yeah, for us as a food bank at our core is to get food to our partners and to our neighbors who need it. And so really addressing immediate needs is the first responsibility that we have, of course, as a social service provider. In our research that we have found that people who access a local pantry more than once a month compared to folks who access less than once a month. They have rates of very low food security, which is our best measure of hunger in the United States, that are 40 to 50% less if you access those pantries more. And that makes sense just because we're a food access source for people. But it also just shows the importance of meeting those immediate needs and how effective the charitable food system can be at reducing hunger in our communities. Um, and overall, we serve about 15% of the population in our service territory, and that is just a huge number of people to try to meet those immediate needs with. On the other hand, I think our advocacy work, using our research and data to help inform policymakers, that's really where we try to use our expertise at providing food to folks who need it to help promote policy level or systems change. And really that looks like just reporting our research on the challenges that people are facing when they visit food pantries to our policymakers in discussions or signing on to different pieces of legislation that we think can have an effect at reducing food insecurity. For instance, one of the things that we've seen is the expanded child tax credit during the COVID-19 pandemic was not a direct nutrition program, but it was the most effective program we have had since I think the creation of the SNAP program to reduce food insecurity. It dropped food insecurity rates among children, especially by about 40%, if I'm remembering those numbers correctly. I think 30 to 40%. And so that's just a massive impact on reducing food insecurity and definitely in our lane to advocate for of like, hey, this is and the grand scheme of things, $250, $300 a month per kid is not a ton of money, but the impact it has at reducing food insecurity is just absolutely just enormous in terms of what we could do that would be an effective policy intervention. In the same vein, we also use our work in our SNAP outreach to really talk about the importance of the SNAP program. And of course, there's been some significant cuts to the SNAP program in the last year, and really just trying to measure the impacts, communicate that to policymakers the best we can, and um, continue to sustain that because we believe that program is critical to the long-term goal of reducing food insecurity in the United States.
For us, looking at short term and long term is really it's the heart of what we're doing, and why we prioritize paying farmers for their food, because then they can continue to choose to farm for their local community, and we can have the investment in food access dollars be reinvested in our community, and so you can have economic development through not only food access short and long term, and also through, we are subsidizing the production of the foods that we want to see be consumed in our community because they're good for our short and long term community health. So how do we take our values and we prioritize them, and also how we're spending our limited dollars? And I think, if you talk to any nonprofit, this past year has been really, really hard because the way that we had thought about funding and support to address these system failures just all went up in the air. And we're still trying to look at what does long-term system change look like at a hyper community level when the problems are way bigger than the community and the policies are way bigger than the community individual advocacy. It's really hard to be effective at that level. So what does it look like at a community level? to support and nurture and provide strong economic development, short and long term. And what does investment look like in community, in food, in agriculture, in farming, in the future of farming, and then what are the existing safety net programs and how can we leverage them more? And so, there's a lot of talk about food as medicine. We've been working on, we've been doing produce prescriptions in partnership with Curling Clinic since 2015, and the past 2 years we've really, the past 4 years have been pausing what we're doing. How do we do it so that we're really connecting and leveraging our existing community resources so we can make best use of the resources that we have, as opposed to trying to find new money. New money is really hard, but how do we take the resources and the strengths that we have in our community and tie them together? And so our produce prescription model is really attempting to look at where is there alignment and where is there long-term potential for food to be part of health conversations, and then what does that look like so that a lot of communities can also engage in that space. And so, we don't do income verification. We always partner with existing programs, and then use that as a way to help support for the short term, and then also to build the long term continuation of positive behavior change, continuation of people choosing to continue to eat fruits and vegetables, farmers choosing to grow for the local community, and community members and stakeholders seeing the value of that and continuing to invest in it, as opposed to it being something that's seen as a flash in the pan or just for people with disposable income.
Well, thank you so much, Maureen and Zach. So I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, cool. So this is a question for both of you. Someone was wondering if there are any specific impacts that you all have seen in the farming community, right, with their local engagement, and was it difficult to find local farmers to join initially?
So I will, the reason that LEAP started was because farmers came to us because they wanted additional places to sell their food, and consumers came together. Farmers came together and consumers came together because they wanted additional marketplaces. And I think when people see something that's working, it attracts other people who want to be part of that. So I think that it's a slow build, and it's a lot of trust over time. So I think when you show up and you follow through, then it's all word of mouth. I mean, we do very little advertising or marketing or anything, and it's really through word of mouth. And I think at the community level, that is the right pace of change. I think sometimes if you're trying to move too fast, then you kind of get ahead of yourself, and it can really, the quality and the relationships can suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that that was well said about word of mouth. That's also how people learn about a lot of our programs, and partnerships that we have with farmers across our region. I think that's also a measure of impact, is like how much people want to talk about those partnerships and spread that to farmers that they know as well. I think for us, the increase that we've had in fresh products available is one of the ways that we measure our impact of these agricultural partnerships.
Okay, so we have another question in the chat that is about your all's sort of frontline perspectives on the causes of persistent food insecurity. And they write, given the abundance of food and wealth, right? And what do you all think would an alternative or more equitable sort of food system look like?
I will respond at a very high level. If you really look at ownership of the food system, it is very consolidated. There are a lot of groups that are trying to look at antitrust cases within the food system, whether it's meat packing or grocery store consolidation or produce consolidation. It's the same companies are integrating not only vertically but also horizontally. And when there's a lot of power within a few people and the corporate stakeholders are the main stakeholders, then it shifts a lot of the where the priority is. Uh, and and that's and then a lot of the smaller, local regional food systems and emergency feeding, we're all trying to figure out how to address some of those failures in our global international food system. And it has changed drastically since the 1950s with more and more consolidation. And you can see, there's a lot of research on what happened even during COVID in meatpacking and labor and, the continued consolidation of 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 our food.
There's just to chime in, there's a recent study, this was from a few years ago, from a professor at Michigan State University that talked about consolidation within different aspects of the food system, right? And you start to see that the majority of the things that we eat, right, are, you have 5 or fewer companies that control more than 80% of that entire market, right? So yeah, it's staggering.
And including seeds and chemicals and fertilizers, it's from input to grocery store. I mean, it's the whole food system. And then on the flip side, for a lot of larger stores, they don't want to work with 20 different farmers. They want to work with one company that provides onions year round. And so that means that then the produce distributor has to be global so that they can source onions year round for the grocery store chain. So, it's what goes into meeting our expectations around food is complicated. And there's a lot of control that's concentrated in a few right now.
I think from the demand side of things, when we talk to neighbors who visit food pantries, a lot of the causes of food insecurity are like low wage work, inconsistent hours, and not being able to access like consistent incomes. Additionally, high cost of housing is our number one reported economic trade-off with food that people have. And followed like closely by the cost of utilities. And so I think those are causes of food insecurity, economic causes of food insecurity, as well as some complications just in thinking about food as medicine. If people have access to less healthy food because they don't earn high incomes, that can also cause medical complications like diabetes, which can further impede like having employment, for instance. And so we often find that working age households are the most likely to face food insecurity, and that's backed up by the national data. And I think some of that has to do with a less consistent, less robust safety net that we have for working age households than senior households, for instance. So, for instance, when the SNAP benefits were paused in November, we saw a 67% increase year over year in visits to the charitable food system. And so that just shows the importance of the robust social safety net to help to kind of offset some of those economic factors as well.
Mhm. I think we're at 7 p.m. So thank you all so much for coming and talking to us and sharing your work. I don't know if we want to turn it over to Jen or someone else for closing remarks or anything. Jen's saying absolutely not.
I can just say thank you on behalf of both Shep and other Ryan on behalf of Campus Kitchen and Washington and Lee and everybody for taking the time to be here tonight, both for our panelists and the people here listening. This is being recorded. If you want to share this with the rest of your network and have those discussions, this Springboard discussions, this should be up. And I know we have at least one podcast coming out. I'm looking at Ryan up here with a local farmer I mean, but basically what used to be a backyard farm that has turned into at least a literal ton of produce into the network each summer. That will be coming out soon too. But thank you so much for being here and giving us your time. And I hope everyone has a great night.